India changed one rule in one department of its government, one domestic regulation, a few paragraphs buried inside a Ministry of Power notification, and overnight, China's entire multi-billion-dollar investment strategy in Nepal became worthless. Every dam Chinese companies had financed, every hydropower project they had built or were building, every rupee of Belt and Road money poured into Nepal's river valleys, all of it stranded, unsellable, dead capital. That is what happened. And most people have no idea it happened at all. But to understand why India had that power and why Nepal is now making decisions that could destroy its own future, you have to go back much further than 2021. You have to go back to the beginning of this relationship, to what Nepal and India actually are to each other, and to the single decision made in the early 1950s that changed everything, a decision that, had it gone differently, would have made everything that came after irrelevant. The political division between India and Nepal is a relatively modern phenomenon resulting from colonial-era treaties signed by the British East India Company and local rulers. Before there was an India, before there was a Nepal, before external forces arrived, there was Akhand Bharat, which means undivided Bharat, that had existed for more than 5,000 years. There was a shared world, a shared language, shared gods, shared rivers, shared stories. Nepal is the land of Pashupatinath, one of Hinduism's most sacred shrines, visited by millions of Indian pilgrims every year. Nepal is the birthplace of Siddhartha Gautama, who became the Buddha, whose teachings define a religion followed by 500 million people, most of them in Asia. Nepal is the land where the Ramayana places Janakpur, the birthplace of Sita, the queen of Lord Ram, the central feminine figure of a history that defines the cultural DNA of more than 1 billion Indians. The Himalayas themselves, the greatest mountain range on earth, were described in Sanskrit as the Devatma Himalaya, the soul of the divine. And the Himalayas belong to both countries in every way that matters. The open border between India and Nepal is unlike any other border in the world. Citizens of both countries can cross freely, work freely, live freely on either side. An Indian can own property in Nepal, a Nepali can serve in the Indian Army, and hundreds of thousands have in the Gurkha regiments, one of the most decorated fighting forces in military history. The Indian and Nepali currencies are interchangeable in large parts of the border region. The two economies are so deeply integrated that separating them would be like trying to separate two rivers that have already joined. This is not a relationship between two countries. This is a relationship between two parts of the same civilization that happened to end up in different administrative units. Which is why what happened in the early 1950s is so important. Because there was a moment, a very real, historically documented moment, when Nepal and India could have been one. In the early 1950s, Nepal was in the middle of its own political revolution. The Rana oligarchy, the hereditary prime ministers who had effectively kept the royal family as figureheads for over a century, was being overthrown. King Tribhuvan Birbikram Shah, who had been largely a ceremonial figure under Rana rule, took refuge in the Indian embassy in Kathmandu in 1950 and eventually escaped to India. India, under Nehru, played a crucial role in facilitating the end of Rana rule and the restoration of the monarchy. And it was in this period that something remarkable reportedly happened. According to former President of India, Pranab Mukherjee, one of the most senior Congress politicians of the 20th century, a man who served in every major government from Indira Gandhi onwards, and whose autobiography is one of the most authoritative insider accounts of Indian political history, King Tribhuvan proposed to Nehru that Nepal be merged with India, that it become a province of the Indian Republic. Nehru declined. Pranab Mukherjee was unambiguous about what he thought of that decision. Had there been anybody else in Nehru's place, they would have seized upon the opportunity. Nepal could have been part of India. The offer was on the table. The king made it. The moment existed. Why did Nehru say no? Professor S. D. Mooney of JNU, one of India's foremost experts on Nepal, offered an explanation. Nehru was worried about international optics. India had already faced criticism for its approach to Goa. The politics of non-alignment meant Nehru wanted to be seen as a different kind of power, not an empire, not an expander. He opted for close relations instead, formalized in the Treaty of Peace and Friendship of 1950. That treaty left Nepal as a separate nation, a tiny, landlocked, mountainous country of about 30 million people, sandwiched between two of the largest and most powerful countries on Earth. Everything that follows from that decision, every problem Nepal has had, every moment of instability, every time a foreign power has tried to use Nepal as a pawn against India, flows directly from the choice that was made. The opportunity to make Nepal part of India came once. It was not taken, and the consequences are still unfolding. Nepal is completely landlocked. There is no ocean access. The Himalayas to the north form one of the most formidable natural barriers on Earth, passes at altitudes above 5,000 meters. Snowbound for most of the year, with no railway and barely any roads capable of carrying heavy freight. To the south, east, and west, India. This geography is not incidental. It is the defining fact of Nepal's existence. Every major import Nepal receives petroleum products, medicine, food staples, industrial goods, consumer products comes through India. Every major export Nepal sends out goods, agricultural products, labor goes through India or to India. The Kolkata port is Nepal's primary access to international shipping. Without India's goodwill and open transit routes, Nepal cannot function as a modern economy. This is not an exaggeration. It is a geographic and economic fact. India has given Nepal access to its electricity grid. India has built roads and infrastructure inside Nepal. India is Nepal's largest source of foreign investment. Indian tourists are the single largest visitor group to Nepal, and hundreds of thousands of Nepali citizens work in India, sending remittances home that form a substantial part of Nepal's GDP. Nepal without India would be completely cut off. This is simply the reality of the geography. And yet Nepal has at various points in its recent history tried to use China as a counterweight to India, to play one giant neighbor off against the other, to extract concessions from India by threatening to tilt toward Beijing. It is a strategy that has failed every single time because the geography always wins. You cannot eat Chinese goodwill when you need Indian transit to get your food. You cannot power your factories with Chinese diplomatic support when your power lines all run south. Which brings us to the most important part of this story. Nepal has over 50 gigawatts of hydropower potential. 50 gigawatts. That is an extraordinary number for a country of 30 million people. Most of it comes from fast-flowing rivers that originate in the Himalayas and flow south toward India. Nepal's rivers are some of the most powerful on Earth, and the terrain they flow through is ideal for hydroelectric generation. But Nepal has a problem. Its domestic market is tiny. 30 million people cannot absorb 50 gigawatts of power. To make these projects financially viable, Nepal has to export electricity. And to export electricity, it needs transmission lines to a market large enough to absorb the power. To the north, the Himalayas. Building transmission lines across mountain passes at 5,000 meters, through terrain that is frozen and inaccessible for much of the year, covering distances that would require billions of dollars in infrastructure investment and reaching a Chinese grid that is already generating vast amounts of its own power and has no pressing need for Nepali electricity. The economics simply do not work. To the south, India, the Indian grid, a country of 1.4 billion people, one of the fastest growing economies in the world, with massive and growing energy demand, connected by transmission infrastructure that already exists, across terrain that is relatively accessible. The economics work perfectly. China understood this geography very well, and China's strategy was not to solve Nepal's energy export problem. It was to use Nepal's energy potential to buy strategic leverage. Beginning in the early 2000s and accelerating through the Belt and Road Initiative, Chinese state banks and construction companies poured money into Nepal's hydropower sector. They built dams, financed construction, trained workers, and established a significant presence in Nepal's most valuable economic sector. The plan was not primarily about power generation. It was about economic dependence, about making Nepal's economy so intertwined with Chinese investment that Kathmandu would have no choice but to align its foreign policy with Beijing. It was the same playbook China used in Sri Lanka, in Pakistan, in Zambia, in a dozen other countries across Asia and Africa. Flood the country with cheap loans and infrastructure investment. Create dependence. Then use that dependence as strategic leverage. In Nepal, the strategy seemed to be working. By the late 2010s, Chinese investment was flowing into hydropower, roads, and other infrastructure. A series of Nepali governments, particularly the KP Sharma Oli government, had grown openly hostile toward India while cozying up to Beijing. Nepal issued a new political map in 2020 claiming Indian territory. Chinese influence in Kathmandu was growing, and then India changed one rule. In February 2021, India's Central Electricity Authority issued a new regulation. The full title was the Procedure for Approval and Facilitating Import/Export, Cross-Border of Electricity by the Designated Authority. The key clause was simple. India would not import electricity from any hydropower project in a neighboring country that had involvement from a company from a country with which India shared a land border, unless that country had a bilateral power cooperation agreement with India. China shares a land border with India. China does not have a bilateral power cooperation agreement with India. India would not buy electricity from any Nepali power project that had Chinese involvement. Not Chinese ownership, not Chinese financing, not even Chinese construction participation. Any Chinese connection whatsoever, and the project was blocked from the Indian market. The impact was immediate and devastating for China's Nepal strategy. Nepal's 456-megawatt Upper Tamakoshi project, the largest hydropower project Nepal had ever built, which became fully operational in 2021, which had taken years and billions of rupees to complete, was blocked from selling its power to India. Why? Because the civil engineering work had been done by Sino-Hydro, a Chinese state-owned construction company. Not the financing, not the ownership, just the construction. That was enough. Think about that for a moment. A dam that is fully built and generating power, sitting on Nepali territory, owned by Nepali entities, cannot sell its electricity to the only market large enough to buy it because a Chinese company built the physical structure. Every wire in Nepal points south. Every transmission line runs toward the Indian grid. There is no alternative market. There is no viable transmission route to China across the Himalayas. The physics and the economics make it impossible. Chinese-backed projects in Nepal were generating power that had nowhere to go. The effect on Chinese investment in Nepal was rapid and decisive. Chinese companies began quietly withdrawing from Nepal's hydropower sector. Projects that had Chinese involvement found themselves commercially unviable. Capital that had flowed in started flowing out, and into the vacuum moved Indian companies. SJVN, the Indian state-owned Satluj Jal Vidyut Nigam, was already building the 900-megawatt Aran 3 project, one of the largest hydropower projects in Nepal's history. In 2021, SJVN was awarded the 679-megawatt Lower Aran project as well. NHPC, another Indian company, acquired licenses for the 750-megawatt West Seti project and the 450-megawatt SR6 project, both of which had previously been listed as BRI projects with Chinese involvement. The Budi Gandaki project, which a Chinese company had held a license for, had its license revoked by Nepal in April 2022. One by one, Chinese companies were replaced by Indian companies. The capital that had entered Nepal under the BRI banner was being systematically purged. Not by military force, not by diplomatic pressure, not even by direct negotiation, simply because the Indian market, the only viable market, had been closed to Chinese-linked power. To be financially viable, Nepali projects had to be clean of Chinese ties. And so they became clean of Chinese ties. This is what strategic power looks like in the 21st century. Not armies crossing borders, not missiles being fired, one regulation, one domestic policy decision, complete checkmate. While China was presenting itself as Nepal's great economic partner, it was doing something else entirely on Nepal's northern border. Nepal's own government institutions documented it. China's People's Liberation Army crossed into Nepali territory in Humla district and moved stone boundary pillars, then built roads and military structures on the land it had taken. In Gorkha district, Chinese forces occupied an entire village, Rui village. 72 Nepali households woke up inside Chinese-controlled territory. China then moved the boundary pillars to make it official. China also diverted rivers that had historically marked the border, redirecting their flow so that more Nepali land ended up on the Tibetan side of the line. In October 2024, the New York Times reported from Nepal's border that China had carved a 600-foot message into Himalayan hillside in characters large enough to be read from orbit on what the Times confirmed was Nepali territory. The message, "Long live the Chinese Communist Party." The BBC confirmed it. NDTV confirmed it. Nepal's own survey department confirmed it in a report that the Nepali Communist Party government quietly buried. And here is the part that matters. People who made the loudest speeches about India stealing Nepali land never gave a single speech about China stealing Rui Village. Not one. The government that picked a public fight with India over a border dispute dating back to 1816 said absolutely nothing about an ongoing, documented, satellite-photographed land grab happening while they were in office. Nepal is a small country. It cannot afford to lose friends, and right now it is picking fights with the one neighbor that has never taken its land while staying silent about the one that is actively taking it. That is not diplomacy. That is a catastrophic miscalculation. In early 2026, Nepal got a new prime minister. His name is Balendra Shah, known as Balan Shah. He is 35 years old. He is a rapper who became the mayor of Kathmandu before making his run for the top job. He leads the Rashtriya Swatantra Party. He is the youngest prime minister in Nepal's history, and within weeks of taking office, he had managed to simultaneously alarm India, confuse his own foreign ministry, and hand China a diplomatic gift it could barely have imagined. It started with a question in Nepal's parliament. Balan Shah was answering questions from opposition members about the long-running border dispute involving Kalapani, Limpiadura, and Lipulek, the tri-junction area where Nepal, India, and Tibet meet, and which India controls and Nepal claims. He said something that made headlines across South Asia. He said in Nepal's parliament, on the record, that not only had India encroached on Nepali land, but Nepal had also encroached on Indian land in multiple places. Nepal's foreign ministry had to go into immediate damage control. Officials clarified that what Shah was referring to was the 10-yard buffer zone on either side of the border, the no-man's land strip where agriculture sometimes crosses the demarcation line, rivers change course, and settlements straddle the technical boundary. This is a normal, mundane phenomenon along open borders. It is not occupation. It is not territorial aggression. It is what happens when 30 million people live their daily lives on both sides of a line drawn by a treaty in 1816. But the damage was done. A sitting prime minister had said in parliament that Nepal had taken Indian land. It was a diplomatic, self-inflicted wound of extraordinary carelessness. Whether it reflected genuine confusion about the border situation, diplomatic inexperience, or both, it came from a man who was supposed to be representing Nepal's interests with precision and clarity. That was problem number one. Problem number two was what he said about third-party mediation. In the same parliamentary session, Shah said that Nepal had engaged diplomatically with India, China, and the United Kingdom regarding the border dispute. He said the UK should be involved in resolving it because the dispute traces back to the Treaty of Sugauli, signed in 1816 with British India. He said China should also be involved. This is India's absolute red line in its neighborhood. The single most consistent and non-negotiable principle of Indian foreign policy regarding its neighbors is bilateralism, that disputes between India and its neighbors are to be resolved between India and that neighbor, without third-party involvement. India made this clear decades ago and has never deviated from it. When Pakistan internationalizes Kashmir, India objects in the strongest terms. When any neighbor tries to bring outside powers into a bilateral dispute, India treats it as a hostile act. Nepal, of all countries, knows this. Nepal has been India's closest neighbor and most deeply connected partner for decades. For a Nepali prime minister to publicly say that China and the UK should mediate the Kalapani dispute is not just a diplomatic miscalculation. It is an act that crosses a line India draws with its closest allies, let alone a country as dependent on India as Nepal. And then came problem number three, perhaps the most telling one. Indian Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri had planned to visit Kathmandu in May 2026. His purpose was to carry a personal invitation from Prime Minister Modi for Balen Shah to visit New Delhi, a diplomatic courtesy, a gesture of engagement from India's largest neighbor and most important partner. Balen Shah refused to meet. Shah's stated reason was what he calls his equal stature policy. He would not meet foreign dignitaries below the rank of foreign minister. A visiting foreign secretary would be received by Nepal's foreign secretary, not by the prime minister. This is technically defensible as a matter of diplomatic protocol. In strict terms, a foreign secretary visits a counterpart foreign secretary. There is nothing unusual about that. But in practice, across South Asia, Indian foreign secretaries have customarily been received by the prime ministers of neighboring countries because of the depth and seniority of the relationship. India has historically been given a level of diplomatic access that reflects the extraordinary closeness of the partnership and that Nepal has benefited from enormously. Balen Shah also refused to meet Sergio Gore, the American Special Envoy for South and Central Asia. His own cabinet members, Foreign Minister Shishir Khanal and Finance Minister Swarnim Weigel, urged him to reconsider. He held firm. The result, India's Foreign Secretary did not visit Kathmandu. The invitation from Prime Minister Modi was not delivered in person. New Delhi issued a statement saying the visit would be rescheduled at mutual convenience diplomatic language for, "We noted what you did and we will respond accordingly." India does not need Nepal. Nepal needs India. A prime minister who has not understood that difference while China quietly takes Nepali land district by district is playing a game he does not understand. He is being reckless and destroying Nepal's most important relationship out of political posturing. India has maintained a military presence in the Kalapani area since 1962, the year of the India-China War, when controlling the strategic heights around Lipulekh Pass became a matter of military necessity. The area has been administered as part of Pithoragarh district in Uttarakhand for decades. This is a genuine dispute between two countries with historical claims that deserve to be examined seriously and resolved bilaterally. India has said as much. India has always maintained that the issue should be resolved through dialogue. What India objects to is the manner in which the dispute has been escalated. The KP Sharma Oli government released a new political map of Nepal in 2020 that incorporated Kalapani, Lipulekh, and Limpiadura as Nepali territory. India rejected this map as unilateral and unjustified. And there is something telling about the timing of that map. It came in 2020. The dispute over these territories has been simmering since at least the 1990s. But the political climate that produced the official map, the demonstrations, the heated nationalist rhetoric it emerged under KP Sharma Oli, a government that was simultaneously inviting Chinese investment, staying silent about Chinese encroachments, and making anti-India sentiment a domestic political strategy. The Lipulekh Pass is also the route for the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, the pilgrimage route used by Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, and Bon followers since at least 1954 to reach Mount Kailash and Lake Mansarovar in Tibet. In 2026, India and China agreed to resume the yatra through Lipulekh after it had been suspended since COVID. Nepal objected, claiming Lipulekh is Nepali territory, and sent diplomatic notes to both India and China. What Nepal did not explain is how, if Lipulekh is Nepali territory, the yatra had been operating through it with Indian facilitation since 1954, without Nepal raising a formal objection for 6 decades. The dispute emerged recently. The yatra is ancient. These timelines are worth examining. There is a fundamental misunderstanding at the heart of Nepal's current foreign policy posture. It is this, that playing India and China against each other is a viable long-term strategy for a small, landlocked country. It is not. Here is what actually happens when small countries try to use China as leverage against India. They get Chinese investment. They sign BRI agreements. They welcome Chinese construction companies. And then over time, they discover that Chinese investment comes with conditions, that Chinese loans have interest rates and repayment terms that become unmanageable, that Chinese companies do not just build infrastructure, they occupy it, manage it, and use it as leverage. Sri Lanka gave China a 99-year lease on Hambantota port. Pakistan has ceded effective control of Gwadar to Chinese entities. These are not partnership arrangements, they are dependency traps. When Nepal picks fights with India, India does not move boundary pillars. India changes an electricity import rule, and Chinese investment becomes worthless. India waits. India reschedules meetings. India says the visit will happen at mutual convenience. India maintains strategic patience. India's approach to Nepal is not about control or domination. India has consistently maintained that it wants a prosperous, stable, democratic Nepal as its partner. The neighborhood first policy that has defined Indian foreign policy under the current government has invested more in Nepal's development than any previous Indian government. But India has red lines. They are not secret. They have never been secret. The first red line is bilateralism. No third-party involvement in India-Nepal disputes. The second red line is anti-India alignment. If Nepal's government actively works against Indian interests, India will respond. Not with armies, but with the kind of economic and diplomatic pressure that a country as dependent on India as Nepal simply cannot sustain. The third red line is the strategic use of Nepal's territory against India. India will not allow the strategic Himalayan heights to be used against it. Within those red lines, India has enormous patience. India will absorb Nepali political rhetoric. India will wait out hostile governments. India will keep the open border, keep the trade flowing, keep the electricity purchases going, keep the investment coming, because India understands that Nepal society and India's society are too deeply intertwined for a permanent rupture to be possible or desirable. But when those red lines are crossed, India has demonstrated clearly that it knows exactly how to respond. The 2021 electricity rule was not announced as a counter move against Nepal or China. It was a domestic regulation. It did not require any threat or any negotiation. It was simply done. And it worked. The open border with India is not a given. The free trade access is not a given. The electricity market is not a given. The remittance flows, the port access, the development assistance, the political goodwill, none of it is guaranteed. All of it exists because India has chosen to maintain it, because the relationship matters to India, because the civilizational and strategic logic of a stable and friendly Nepal is in India's interest. The moment Nepal's government decides that China is a better strategic partner than India, India will demonstrate quietly and efficiently exactly how wrong that calculation is. It already has. India will always be there when Nepal is ready to acknowledge what they actually are to each other. The question is how long it takes Nepal's current leadership to figure that out, and how much damage they do to their own country in the meantime. The full picture of Nepal's dependence on India is worth understanding in concrete terms. India accounts for roughly 2/3 of Nepal's total trade. Nepal's imports are overwhelmingly from or through India. Nepal's electricity exports go almost entirely to India. Nepal is landlocked. Its primary access to international shipping is through the Kolkata port in India. Nepali migrant workers in India number in the millions. They send remittances home that are a significant portion of Nepal's GDP. This flow of people and money is possible only because of the open border treaty between the two countries, a treaty that exists because India chose to maintain it. Nepal receives hundreds of thousands of Indian tourists every year. India has provided development assistance worth hundreds of crores of rupees to Nepal over the decades. None of this means Nepal has no right to its own foreign policy or its own dignity. Every country has that right. But a prime minister who postures about equal stature while his country's economy runs entirely on Indian goodwill is not protecting Nepal's dignity. He is putting Nepal's existence at risk for domestic political theater.